What is going on, everybody? Welcome to All Sports Talk with Peter Burtnett. I want to start this pilot episode of All Sports Talk by wishing everybody a happy new year. I hope you had a wonderful holiday season, had some great time with family, friends, to just reflect on the past year and now kind of look forward to this next year that's starting today. Little introduction quickly about myself before I get in this episode. I'm a huge sports fan. I've played many sports throughout my life. Baseball was my main one, but I played soccer, basketball, were the two other sports that I spent significant time playing. Significant being for me 1 year of soccer, but it really sparked an interest in that sport. And currently I work as a sports editor in the Omaha, Council Bluffs metro area. I work actually now on both sides of the Missouri River, and I'm looking forward to starting this new chapter of covering sports in this area. For this first video, though, what I wanted to start out with is a pretty obvious decision, to be honest, after the amazing day we had yesterday in the college football world, and that was a combination of the two best college football playoff semifinals that we have ever had. Certainly the best two together, and debatedly, I think both games are better, or at the very least equal to the 2017 Rose Bowl between Oklahoma and Georgia that went to overtime. So without further ado, I'm going to dive into that first game, the Fiesta Bowl between TCU and Michigan, won 51-45 by the Horned Frogs over the Wolverines. And that game pretty much started how it would go throughout the game, and that would be with missed chances for the Wolverines. They started with the Philly special, which was questionable call to go for it. I can understand why they would go for it. I think it was 4th and goal from the 2 or 3 yard line, but the play simply did not work. They tried to get a little too cute with it, and they ended up, instead of getting 3 points or potentially 7 points, they ended up getting 0. And then when they were able to get the ball back after keeping TCU from really moving the ball or doing anything, J.J. McCarthy threw the first of 2 pick sixes. And I have a good friend, Joe. Hopefully he'll be tuning into this first video. Joe Staten is a Wolverines fan, and I know we've talked before that J.J. McCarthy was the quarterback that had high highs and low lows. Cade McNamara, the starting quarterback before McCarthy, and kind of interchangeably with McCarthy at times early this year, they were both competing for the job. McNamara was the kind of game manager, and then McCarthy had a much higher ceiling. And that ended up really biting Michigan yesterday. He did have a good stat line, though. He finished 20 for 34, 343 yards, 2 touchdowns, but again, and 52 rushing yards, but again, also those 2 interceptions. And so he throws the pick six. TCU picks up a little bit of the momentum. Bud Clark was the one who returned that one for a touchdown. He also fumbled, and then threw another pick six, this time to D. Winters later in the game. But before they got to that second pick six, there was a key call, and there's another one later in the game that I'll dive into really more in depth when I talk about the Ohio State-Georgia game. But the Roman Wilson non-touchdown, after looking over the play a few times, seeing it live last night, I think of all the calls that could have gone different ways last night, I think targeting are the only 2 other real debatable ones. I think that call was questionable. I think by the time he attained possession of the football, I think he had rolled across the goal line, and Michigan should have been giving a touchdown there. However, when you're at the half-yard line, you have to punch that ball in, or at least hold on to the ball and get 3 points. But on the I think next play or 2 plays later, Michigan fumbled the ball, TCU got the ball back, and that kind of killed the momentum, and that was, again, one of those missed chances. Throughout the game, really throughout both games, there were, defense was optional in both games. Big holes, big plays all over the place. Receiving wise, Roman Wilson did end up having a big game, 104 yards and a touchdown. Ronnie Bell has become a staple of the Michigan offense, and he finished with 6 catches for 137 yards and a touchdown. Michigan didn't quite do with the run game what they did against my Buckeyes, but they were able to get a little bit going on the ground. And field goals were also another example of missed chances. Michigan, not only did they not score in both of those situations where they were inside of the 2, but they also, I think, 3 times had to settle for a field goal when they were, across into dangerous territory. One of those, though, they weren't really close. They had to kick the field goal. And credit to Jake Moody. He is probably the best kicker in the Big Ten, if not in college football, and he nailed a 59-yarder, which I think is a Michigan record. So shout out Jake Moody for making that field goal. Also, a theme of the game was chaos throughout. Really chaotic game, lots of turnovers. Max Duggan threw a couple of interceptions as well. He had a solid game, able to get it down on the ground, finishing with 225 passing yards and a pair of touchdown throws as well. And missed tackles were also key. I think the big one for me, and there was a great move by wide receiver Quentin Johnston, but a missed tackle opportunity for Michigan when they could have held TCU. It was third down. I think TCU was just on their side of the 50. Quentin Johnston ends up making a little bit of a stutter move, gets past the defender, and has the whole sideline and winds up scoring a touchdown. Johnson finished with 6 catches, 163 yards, and a touchdown, so a huge game for the TCU wide receiver. Late in the game, Michigan again had a chance. I think at this point they might have still been up by... Michigan was either down by 2 scores or it might have been down to 6 by this point, but TCU got a big kick return. You know what, actually, I think it was a potentially... Whatever the scoreline was, Michigan was still in the game, but TCU had a big kick return on a punt. They were held to a field goal, but ultimately Michigan did get the ball back down 51-45 with a chance to win the game. They couldn't do anything on the first 3 plays, so they have 4th and 10 with, I think at this point, under a minute left in the game, and They had trouble with the snap. If you were watching the game, you heard McDonough say those words again. Michigan fans have now kind of swinged back with that. Obviously back in 2015, they had the botched punt that was returned by Jalen Watts-Jackson. That's a iconic call in Big Ten, specifically, Michigan. And obviously, as a Buckeye fan, it's a moment that I kind of savored a little bit, I'll be honest. But they had kind of gotten redemption from that when Michigan State had trouble with the snap in their rivalry game this year. But McCarthy, it was kind of a low snap. I don't think he was ready for it. He dropped the snap. It's on the ground, and they were unable to do anything with the play. But there was a forward lateral actually, that went to, I can't remember which Michigan player, but it went to a Michigan player, and there was certainly debate for targeting. I think it was actually pretty similar to the Ohio State targeting non-call against Marvin Harrison Jr. that, again, I'll get into a little bit more in the breakdown of the next game. But that would have given him 15 yards. I think they would have been right around the 50, maybe either just behind or just past the 50, and would have given them a chance to potentially go down and score the game-winning touchdown and kick the game-winning extra point. But it was not to be, and TCU came away with a huge win. It's the first playoff win for a Big 12 team. Only Oklahoma had ever even gotten to the playoff, and they were never able to really do much of anything, even really keep games close in the playoff. But credit to TCU, they played a great game. Michigan simply missed so many opportunities, and I'm not trying to relish in this as a Buckeye fan. I'm just stating the facts that when you're down inside the 2 twice and you get 0 points, it's going to be tough to win a football game. And really, the thing with sports, when people say, and I'm kind of saying it now, that one team deserves to win more than the other team does, I think that was kind of the case in both of these games yesterday, because Michigan played a good game, but they couldn't finish. And again, you have to be able to finish to win games. It's as simple as that. It's something the Buckeyes weren't able to do either. But really, either way, if you want to talk about who deserved to win and who doesn't, they were both phenomenal games, and it was a sign of things to come how the TCU Michigan game went. But now, diving into that Buckeye game, and this one's, obviously stings a little bit to talk about, but man, what an incredible game. If I can find the clip, I'll maybe throw it in here, but Stetson Bennett just basically, after the game, was just kind of in awe during his post-game interview.
Dude stepped up. What a game. What a game. A little bit biased. That might be better than 17 Rose Bowl. I don't know, but good Lord. Wow.
The words that I said earlier, potentially better than the 2017 Rose Bowl. Again, I think it was, but that game was an incredible game that is pretty hard to top. But this game started, and really most of the way, except for a period late in the second quarter, it started in favor of the Buckeyes. Marvin Harrison Jr. Continued an incredible season. His stat line was cut short by the potential targeting call. Again, I'll get into that a little bit later into this. But he was knocked out. It was quite clearly a concussion or some other head injury. Before that, though, he had 5 catches, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He scored the first touchdown. If you saw that one, he kind of was running in the back of the end zone. CJ Stroud kind of motioned him over, and he was able to find him open for a touchdown on a great pass. And that gets to another point. CJ Stroud had the absolute game of his life. Stats aren't always everything, but his stats in this one, he was 23 for 34, so decent completion percentage, not great, but 348 yards, 4 touchdowns, and he got it done with 34 rushing yards as well, and that number is actually, I think, a little bit skewed because the sack yards bring that down a little bit. I'm sure if you talk about just net rushing or just rushing yards, taking away the loss of yards for sacks, I think it had to have been probably, I would say almost certainly over 50, probably closer to like 70. But just an incredible game for him. There's one run very late in the game that I thought had won the Buckeyes the game. Obviously, that proved not to be the case. But just an incredible game by C.J. Stroud. He showed a lot of escapability, like I said, being able to get things done with his legs. He showed incredible poise in the pocket, and he really delivered, not quite the W, but C.J. Stroud really delivered in a huge game. Really, again, the absolute game of his life, the best game I've seen him play as a Buckeye fan. And on the other side, Stetson Bennett had an early interception that the Buckeyes capitalized on, but he really, like all winning quarterbacks do, he was able to respond from that. He actually finished with the exact same completions and attempts as Stroud, 23 for 34. He threw for 398 yards, 3 touchdowns, and the INT. That is a lot of passing yards for a team that, reputation-wise, with guys like Nick Chubb has and Todd Gurley, and even going back Herschel Walker for years, for decades now, Georgia has been a big running team. But Stetson Bennett was able to exploit an Ohio State secondary that still showed they have massive holes, and it happened on both sides of the ball, kind of like the TCU Michigan game, but a lot of big plays, a lot of missed tackles by the Georgia defense, but also the Ohio State defense as well. And Georgia made a late run after the strong Buckeyes start. They went up 24-21, but again, the Buckeyes offense was able to respond, get down the field, score a touchdown, and wound up going into halftime up 28-24. The start of the second half, I thought, was what would kind of potentially not put the game away. That's a little early to be saying that, but would really put the Buckeyes in a great position when they were able to get a stop, score another touchdown, and then I think get another stop. And they were up 35-24 at this point. They had a lot of momentum, but Georgia stepped up with 2 big sacks. The first one was here midway through the third quarter. The Buckeyes were backed up all the way inside like the 20 or something like that. They were facing, I believe it was second and medium, or maybe even second and short. And Georgia got a huge sack, forced us to, third and long, eventually punt, and they were able to kind of start getting into the game. And then I think the biggest play of the game at the end of the third quarter, just under a minute left in the third quarter. Marvin Harrison Jr. was in the back of the end zone. He had actually gone out of bounds, but he was able to reestablish himself in the end zone, and the Georgia defender Bullard came charging in. The pass was lofted perfectly by C.J. Stroud, and that's another thing. He in the first half he had a perfectly. I mean, it was beautiful to watch the way he lofted the pass to Xavier Johnson for a touchdown over the middle. Great adjustment also by Johnson, because it was, I think, a little bit behind him. He had to turn around. But besides that point, again, it was another great touch pass, and Harrison had a defender kind of on his side or kind of in front of him, and then he had Bullard coming in, and Bullard delivered a big hit. I think, even as a Buckeye fan, I think it was with his shoulder, and from looking back at it, I went through and watched the highlights right before this. I had watched, the whole games through, pretty much play by play. And I think both the Michigan non-targeting call and the Ohio State targeting call, I think, were actually the right call. It's interesting, in my opinion. Both of the plays are what you would say that's definitely targeting when you see it live. They were huge hits. Fortunately, the Michigan player, I don't think was really hurt by the play, but I know Harrison obviously was, and he was knocked out for the rest of the game. And that ended up being huge. Like I said, he had 5 catches, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns just through 3 quarters, and that's what he's been doing all year. And I think C.J. Stroud he didn't do as much running in the first half, and the reason is he had to do more is because his receivers, credit to Xavier Johnson, he got open a few times. Julian Fleming also got open a few times, and Emeka Ibuka, who finished with 8 receptions, 112 yards, and a touchdown. Credit to those guys. But when you don't have Harrison, at this point, Stroud's gotten used to not having Jackson Smith and Jigba. But when you don't have Harrison, especially after the first half and early third quarter that he had, that was a big loss, and I think that was kind of the difference maker for Ohio State. Not to take away from the defense's inability to stop Georgia, but that was huge. Another player who stepped up for the Dogs late was Brock Bowers, their tight end. Throughout the game, if you were listening to it, Herbie and Chris Fowler, Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Fowler were saying on the ESPN broadcast that, when is he going to finally make a play? And then, of course, in the fourth quarter, like great players do, Brock Bowers stepped up and made a couple of huge plays for the Bulldogs. And they also had some great plays. A.D. Mitchell, there was another late play where they, I think at this point, cut the deficit down maybe to 3 with this touchdown, where Lathan Ransom slipped and the Georgia wide receiver was simply wide open and just walked down the sideline pretty much into the end zone. And so they're, just that one I don't think was as much at fault. The player in the Buckeye secondary, it was a slip. Sometimes those things happen. He might have been beat anyways, but that was a big play to give Georgia more of the momentum. And then it came down to field goals and again a Georgia sack. So Noah Ruggles, he's had a phenomenal season for Ohio State, and being a fan, it's tough not to be like, man, how do you miss that field goal there at the end? But I can't imagine the pressure that he faces, and I know he's made some great kicks for us over the last year. And he made one from short earlier in the game, and then he made one from 48 to make it 41-35. Before that, though, the Buckeyes were driving and appeared to be poised to score a touchdown again, but with under 4 minutes left, I think it was 2nd and 5 on this play. Stroud was looking for a wide receiver, and he ended up backtracking about 10 yards and ended up getting sacked, and we were forced to settle for the 48-yard field goal. So that was, again, those 2 big Georgia sacks. It was midway through the third when the Buckeyes were really establishing momentum at halftime, and then late in the fourth quarter when the Buckeyes, with another first down, again, it was 2nd and 5. With another first down, would have been able to take off about a minute off the clock, probably at least, or at least make Georgia use the rest of their timeouts. And then potentially punch it in for a touchdown to bring it back to a 2-score game. But credit to the Georgia defense. That's what they pride themselves on. The Buckeyes did a phenomenal job of, being able to score on that Georgia defense, but they made the plays when they had to. And again, those 2 field goals in both were in the second half actually by Ruggles, ended up being huge because you score a touchdown on one of those, and the game is a different ballgame. Of course, Georgia also missed a couple field goals. But then late, Georgia drives down the field pretty quickly, really easily, gets a touchdown, makes the extra point to go ahead 42-41. And that was the A.D. Mitchell touchdown. Kind of, it was a great move in the back of the end zone to get Denzel Burt kind of off balance, and he got back of the end zone. Stetson Bennett lofted a perfect pass to A.D. Mitchell in the back corner of the end zone. But, and I said this when it happened, they left C.J. Stroud plenty of time on the clock. It was about 55 seconds maybe, when the touchdown was scored. So plenty of time. Stroud made a pass to Fleming that picked up some good yardage, and then he had just the best run I've seen from a Buckeye quarterback since probably, and they mentioned it on the broadcast, and I'm just going to go with it, was Cardale Jones, the way he was able to break off a big run against Alabama, and really just in general when he came in that 2014 championship run. So C.J. Stroud, sees a lane up the middle of the field. He takes it from the Buckeye side of the field. He gets down to, I think, the Georgia 31. And so the Buckeyes are in great position. There's under 30 seconds left now, but they have their 2 timeouts because Georgia used theirs. And for some reason, after that play, I think they might have ran one more run play that lost. They ran a run play that lost a yard, and then, for whatever reason, with 2 timeouts, I'm not sure if it's because we had been doing such a good job against their secondary and their pass defense, but the Buckeyes decided to try to pass the ball a couple of times, and neither one of those did anything. Stroud did well to avoid a sack on one of the plays. He was all the way back near the 50 when he was able to throw it away. And so Ruggles comes in, 50-yard field goal. It's approaching midnight at this point of the new year. And it's a sour moment for me again as an Ohio kid, but he simply, it seemed like from looking at the kick, it almost, first of all, he got iced, so this is one of those cases where icing the kicker actually does work. But it seemed, just from looking at the mechanics of his kick, that his leg kind of didn't go all the way through. He kind of kicked it, and his leg stopped almost when it hit the football, and it went wide left, way short. And again, I feel for Ruggles because while I've never been an athlete in that level of a situation, I did play sports in high school, and I know there's a lot of pressure that comes with being in those situations. So, all but praise for Ruggles. He made some great kicks for Ohio State, simply wasn't able to knock that one through. And so Georgia survived, came away with a 42-41 win to advance to the college football national championship game played at SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles next Monday night. They'll be taking on TCU. Quick early thoughts about that game. TCU has been doubted this whole season. They had 4 wins last year. Sonny Dykes comes in, coaches them. Probably the best turnaround I've seen since Gus Malzahn at Auburn, taking that team from, I think, 4 wins to, I think, 13, the national championship game, and they end up losing to Florida State. But a great turnaround that year. They've been doubted all year. I think everybody, as much as Georgia showed they have holes against the Buckeyes, I think Georgia is certainly an early favorite in that one. I think maybe more hope than think. I hope it'll be it'll even match half of what these 2 semifinals were. But I do think ultimately the championship experience will help Georgia when it comes down late. And I think that showed itself against Ohio State. It's not like Ohio State as a program doesn't have that experience, but they don't have a championship that, that any of the guys playing for the team had experience doing. And this Georgia team, half of them do. At least half of them do. even if some of them didn't start last year, they all have that experience. Repeating's tough. Aside from being Alabama or Clemson didn't ever repeat, but they won a couple in quick succession. So it's definitely tough to do. It'll take a huge effort by Georgia, but I think ultimately the Bulldogs do win the national championship next Monday. And so just some final thoughts on those semifinals yesterday. Man, what a day for college football. We've waited since this playoff became a thing for these two extra games to make a difference. Pretty much every year, again, really except for that 2017 Rose Bowl, and then also the 2019, I think it was a Fiesta Bowl as well, Ohio State versus Clemson. Really tough loss for Ohio State that year, 29-23. Aside from those two games, we haven't even had one game in a year that was a one-score game, much less two that absolutely go down to the wire, go down to the final play or at least the final minute. And so it's as a college football fan, that's probably my favorite sport, even more than NFL football is college football, just because it's such an exciting sport. I know a lot of times kind of throughout the season there are a lot of blowouts because you got Ohio State and Michigan taking on teams like Rutgers and stuff like that. But when it comes down to it and you get games like these, man, it is such a joy to watch. And so that's it for me. I appreciate it if you've taken the time to watch or listen this far into this episode of All Sports Talk, and I hope you'll stick with me. I hope if you enjoyed the video, you'll subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like again if you enjoyed it. I'd love to see comments, hear your thoughts about both of these games, and if you want to add anything to what you expect in the national championship, I'd love to hear your thoughts as the audience, and I'd also like to hear your thoughts of where I should go with this. I'm figuring this out. Probably going to do a little bit of NFL talk. I love soccer, or if you're international, I love real international football. But I'm also, again, baseball is the sport that I have the most experience with. I enjoy basketball as well, and maybe even some of the smaller sports will give a little bit of coverage to here and there as it warrants. But again, if you've enjoyed the video, please leave it a like, subscribe to the channel if you're interested in more content like this. And without further ado, this is Peter Burtnett, All Sports Talk, signing out. Peace.